He thought he was being generous. That's the part that still gets me. The way my brother-in-law smiled when he said it, like he was doing the whole table a favor. "Somebody find Wren something to do," he announced, loud enough for the entire backyard to hear. "She's been standing by the potato salad for 20 minutes. Very on brand." Everyone laughed. My sister laughed. My mother pressed her lips together in that particular way she has. Not disagreement, just discomfort she didn't plan to act on. I smiled too. I've gotten good at that. It was the 4th of July. My brother-in-law, I'll call him what he is because titles are the only thing he respects, had rented out the back half of his property in Westchester for the occasion. Catered. Open bar. A bouncy castle for his kids that cost more than my first semester of college. He'd made partner at his firm 2 years ago and hadn't stopped celebrating since. I stood by the potato salad and held my paper plate and thought about the last 72 hours of my life, which I was not allowed to discuss with anyone at this party. That's the thing about the work I do. It doesn't follow you home because home doesn't exist the way it used to. You move through regular life, grocery stores, family parties, your sister's backyard in Westchester, and you carry this other thing inside you like a second skeleton, and nobody can see it, and you learn not to need them to. My name is Wren. I'm 31 years old. For the past 4 years, I've been a special agent with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, assigned to a joint task force that I am not going to name because that's not how this works. Before that, I spent 3 years as a criminal investigator with the Army, 2 of which were overseas. Before that, I put myself through college on a combination of ROTC scholarship and weekend shifts at a diner outside Columbus, Ohio, where I grew up. My brother-in-law, his name is Griffin, and I'll use it because anonymizing him feels like a kindness he hasn't earned. Works in corporate mergers and acquisitions. He makes a lot of money. He married my sister Paige 11 years ago when she was 22, and he was 30, and already certain he was the most interesting person in any room he entered. He has never been in a room with me when I was actually trying. The party went the way those parties go. My dad worked the grill. My mime circulated with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Paige organized the kids' games with the particular exhausted competence of a woman who has learned to manage everything, so that nothing appears to need managing. Griffin held court near the bar, telling a story about a deal he closed in March that I'd heard 3 times already. I ate my potato salad. I watched a cardinal land on the fence post near the hydrangeas. I thought about a case file I'd left on my desk at 11 the night before and whether my partner had followed up on the warehouse lead without me. "So what is it you actually do?" Griffin's colleague asked me. I hadn't caught his name. He was the kind of man who looks through you first and at you second, recalibrating only if you turn out to be useful. "I work for the federal government," I said. "Doing what?" "Analysis. Like data. Something like that." He lost interest and turned back to Griffin's story. I let him. This is the part I need you to understand, because it matters for everything that comes after. I was not embarrassed. I want to be clear about that. I have sat across from men who have done things I will not describe in polite company, and I have kept my voice level and my hands still and my face completely neutral, and I have gotten what I needed from them. A backyard in Westchester does not rattle me, but there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being underestimated by the people who are supposed to know you. Not strangers. Family. People who watched you grow up, who have access to all the data, and have chosen, persistently, to ignore it. Griffin first called me the intern as a joke at Christmas 4 years ago. I had just passed my field agent qualifying exam. I had not told anyone because it wasn't their information. He made a comment about my government salary, which he'd apparently looked up, because that's the kind of person he is, and said something about how at least interns get free coffee. It stuck. The way things stick when everyone laughs. By the 4th of July, it was a tradition. "How's the intern life, Wren?" said with affection, supposedly. Said the way people say things they mean but want deniability for later. I didn't correct it. That was my choice, and I own it. Some information is operational. Some silence is strategic. I had simply decided, somewhere along the way, that Griffin's understanding of my life was not a priority. That would have been fine, it would have stayed fine. It would have stayed fine. Except that 3 weeks after the 4th of July party, Griffin called in a favor. I didn't find out until later how it happened. That he'd mentioned to my dad, in passing, that one of his firm's clients had a situation. A sensitive one. The kind that sometimes required a government contact. My dad, trying to be helpful the way fathers do, mentioned that his daughter worked for the federal government and that maybe she could point them in the right direction. Griffin apparently paused for a beat and then said, "Wren? She's basically a file clerk, Dad. Let me handle it." He handled it. He called in a contact he had, a former DOJ attorney, now in private practice. And that contact made some calls, and 2 of those calls ended up crossing wires with an active investigation that my task force had been running for 8 months. 8 months. I found out on a Tuesday. My supervisor called me into his office at 7 in the morning, which is never good, and put a printed email on the desk in front of me. I read the name of Griffin's firm. I read the name of the client. I read the date the private contact had made his inquiry. I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for one breath. "The inquiry flagged our wire surveillance," my supervisor said, "which means whoever made that call either got lucky or got tipped. We need to know which." I told him I would look into it. I did not tell him it was my brother-in-law. Not yet. That information would land when it needed to. And landing it wrong would create problems I didn't have the bandwidth to manage on top of everything else. What I did instead was work. That's the only real answer I've ever found to most problems. Work. I pulled the inquiry logs, traced the contact chain, spent 46 hours over the next 4 days mapping exactly how a conversation in my father's driveway had cascaded into a potential 8-month compromise. It hadn't, as it turned out, not fully. The inquiry had touched the edge of our surveillance net but hadn't penetrated. We were intact. 3 degrees of separation had saved us. And luck. And the fact that Griffin's contact had been fishing for information rather than passing it. But it was close. Closer than 8 months of careful work should ever get. I drafted a 6-page incident report. I named every node in the contact chain. I named Griffin's firm. I did not name Griffin specifically because he was tangential. He hadn't known, hadn't acted with intent, had simply been careless with information he didn't know existed. But his firm's name was in there, and that was enough. I sent the report up the chain on a Friday afternoon. On Saturday morning, my mother called to tell me that Paige and Griffin were having people over for brunch on Sunday, and would I please come, because I'd missed the last 2 family things and Griffin had made a comment. I said I'd be there. I want to tell you I had a plan. I didn't, or rather, I had the only plan I ever have. Show up, be present, see what happens. I'm not a person who engineers moments. I've worked alongside people who are, and I find it exhausting. Reality has a way of engineering its own moments, if you're patient. Sunday brunch was in the same backyard, minus the bouncy castle. Paige had made quiche. There were mimosas, which I declined because I was technically on call, and a fruit platter that no one was eating, and Griffin's 2 kids running in circles around the lawn furniture with the chaotic energy of small humans who have eaten too much sugar before 10 in the morning. Griffin greeted me at the back gate. He was in a good mood, which usually meant he had news. "Wren," he said, and clacked me on the shoulder in a way that was 2% too hard to be casual. "The intern graces us with her presence." "Griffin," I said, "you look tired. The federal government running you ragged? All those spreadsheets?" "Something like that." I went and found my mother and kissed her cheek, and helped carry the quiche out to the table and sat down between my father and my niece, who is 7 years old and currently obsessed with marine biology and will, I think, be formidable. We were 20 minutes into brunch when Griffin's phone rang. He glanced at it, frowned, and held up a finger. 1 second, and stepped away toward the side of the house. I ate my quiche. My niece told me about a documentary she'd watched about octopuses. I listened genuinely because octopuses are remarkable animals, and my niece explains things with a rigor that I respect. Griffin came back 5 minutes later. He was not in a good mood anymore. He sat down and picked up his mimosa and put it down without drinking it. He looked at the center of the table. He had the particular expression of a man who has just been told something that rearranged a prior understanding, and who is now quietly running the numbers on what that means. I waited. That was Henderson, he said, to no one in particular. Henderson was a senior partner at his firm. Everything okay? Paige asked. Fine, he said. A thing with a client? It's handled. He looked up, and his eyes moved around the table, and they landed on me. I watched him process it. I watched the moment he got there. Because here is what I think happened on that phone call, though I was not on it and am only drawing inference from subsequent events. Henderson had been contacted by someone who had indicated, with the particular weight that federal inquiry carries, that Griffin's firm had made contact with a matter under active investigation, and that the firm should consider itself on notice, and that further inquiries in that direction would be inadvisable. That's a standard notification. It goes to legal counsel. It is not an accusation, it is a flag. But Henderson, being the kind of senior partner who did not get where he was by being slow, would have immediately asked how his firm had ended up adjacent to a federal investigation. And the answer to that question, traced back through the chain, would have ended at a conversation Griffin had with my father in a driveway in Westchester about his sister-in-law, the file clerk. Griffin looked at me across the fruit platter. I looked back at him. Wren, he said. His voice was careful now, a different register than the one he'd been using all morning. Yes? What is it you do exactly? At your job. My niece looked up from her plate. My father stopped cutting his quiche. My mother went very still in the way she goes still, when she suspects something is about to happen and hasn't decided yet whether to intervene. I'm a special agent, I said. FBI. I've been assigned to a joint federal task force for the past 3 years. Before that, I was a criminal investigator with the Army. The backyard was quiet except for the sprinkler next door. Griffin stopped, started again. You're an FBI agent. Yes. Since when? Since I was 27. I've been in federal law enforcement since I was 24. He looked at my father. My father looked at his plate with the expression of a man who has known something for approximately 30 seconds and is already certain he should have asked more questions over the years. You never said, Griffin said. He was looking at me again. You never asked, I said. You told people I was basically a file clerk. I didn't see a reason to correct it. I didn't. I was joking. The intern thing was, I know what it was, I said. I wasn't angry. I want to be precise about that. Anger requires a kind of investment in the other person's perception of you, and I had made peace some years ago with the fact that Griffin's perception of me was not something I needed to manage. What I felt, sitting there with my quiche going cold, was closer to tired. A specific, familiar tired, like a piece of old furniture you know is uncomfortable, but keep anyway because it's been there so long. Your firm made contact with a matter under federal investigation, I said. 8 months of work. I've been told the notification went to your senior partner this morning. Griffin had the complexion of a man who spends weekends outdoors, which meant the blood leaving his face was visible from where I sat. We didn't know. I know you didn't know, I said. That's in my report. That's why it's a notification and not a subpoena. But I'd recommend that the next time you decide to call in a favor on a sensitive matter, you find out what sensitive actually means in your family before you start making calls. My niece was looking at me with enormous eyes. You're like a spy? She said. Sort of, I said. More like a detective. That is so cool, she said with the absolute conviction of a 7-year-old who has just rearranged her understanding of her aunt and found the new version significantly more interesting. I ate the rest of my quiche. It had gone a little cold, but Paige makes a good quiche, sharp cheddar and caramelized onion, and it was still worth eating. Griffin didn't say much for the rest of brunch. He refilled his mimosa twice. He looked at me with the particular expression of a man recalibrating. running back through every conversation, every joke, every time he had explained my life to people who hadn't asked, and finding the new math uncomfortable. Good. Discomfort, in my experience, is the only thing that produces actual recalibration. Comfort produces repetition. My mother pulled me aside when I was leaving, near the gate, while Paige was corralling the kids back inside. "You could have told us," she said. Her voice was quiet, not accusatory. "Just sad, maybe." "I know," I said. "Why didn't you?" I thought about it for a moment. The real answer is complicated. It's about compartmentalization and the particular discipline of not carrying work into spaces where it doesn't belong, and the way that discipline, over years, quietly reshapes what you share and with whom. But that's not the whole answer. The other part of the answer is that I'd learned, gradually, that my family's understanding of me was something they constructed, and that constructions are comfortable, and that people resist having their constructions disturbed. Griffin had built the intern because it was useful to him. Because having a less-than sister-in-law is a particular kind of satisfaction, and my family had let it stand because it was easier than asking questions. None of that was malicious. That's important to say. Families do this. Absorb a version of you that was true at some point and stop updating the file. "I guess I was waiting," I said. "For what? For it to matter?" My mother hugged me. She's a small woman. My mother. She came up to my collarbone, and she hugged me the way she's hugged me since I was small. Both arms, no reserve. Like she's checking that all of me is still there. "It always mattered," she said, against my shoulder. "We just didn't know what we were looking at." I drove back to my apartment in D.C. that evening, 3 hours down the highway with the windows cracked and a podcast on low that I wasn't really listening to. The case file was waiting on my desk. My partner had followed up on the warehouse lead and left me a voice message that said, "Call me when you're up. We have something," in the tone that means it's actually something. I called her back, just past Fredericksburg, Virginia, and we talked through it for 40 minutes. And by the time I pulled off the highway, I had 6 new things on my to-do list and a clearer picture of a thread we'd been chasing for 2 weeks. That's the work. That's always been the work. Not the reveal, not the moment in the backyard, not Griffin's face when the phone call landed. Those things happen and then they're over, and the work is still there. I don't need my brother-in-law to respect me. I realized that somewhere around mile marker to 130, with the Potomac dark on my left and the city lights starting to gather on the horizon. I never did. I just needed him to stop costing me 8 months.